Midnight Sun Marathon is truly the definition of a bucket list race. If you're looking for a really fun race to do in June that's going to show you a whole new part of the world, look no further, you have your race. Let's get into the race and things to do while traveling north of the Arctic Circle. First, traveling to Tromso can be a lot of work. You're at a minimum going to need to take one layover in either Bergen or Oslo, but most likely you're going to need to take two or three depending on where you're coming from. I was only traveling in from Lisbon and it still took me 12 plus hours to get all the way to Tromso. It is very far north. Like you hear the words north of the Arctic Circle, but I need you to understand the words north of the Arctic Circle. It's going to take a while to get there. I would also recommend booking your tickets way far in advance. This race happens the same week as the summer solstice, and in Norway that is a big deal, where the sun doesn't set, and it's a huge celebration. So a lot of people who aren't runners are going to be traveling in. For example, I booked out almost 3 months in advance, but I still missed out on the only direct flight from Lisbon to Oslo that I could have grabbed for myself. So get in, book early. I'd recommend spending at least 5 days traveling around Tromso and the surrounding areas. Like I said, you are traveling really far north. And that's a lot. So you should get the most for your money because realistically, when are you ever going to travel this far north again? I was primarily based out of Tromso, but I did spend one night on the island of Senja. If I was to go back, I would rent a car and spend more time driving around for the little fishing villages. But this was the perfect trip for me as a solo traveler who didn't want to deal with the logistics of renting a car. Here are a few of the things I did while I was in Tromso to really maximize my time. First, because I was there for the Midnight Sun race, I wanted to make sure I was doing something at midnight and all the days leading up, just to acclimate my body to activity and movement when I'm usually sleeping. So one of the things I did was the Sherpatrappen. These are a 1,200 stairs that go up to the top of this little mountain next to Tromso, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I started, I think, at like 10 o'clock, and it only took me an hour to get up. Everything on Google was saying that it would take 90 minutes to 2 hours to climb all the steps. But here's the deal between me and you. We're here for a half marathon. Google is for non-half marathon runners. So it took me an hour. It was also really buggy on the stairs and I didn't want to stop. So I just kept going up and up and up. And then once I was at the top, there were no more trees and all the bugs were kind of just dissipated into the wind. So it was perfect. There's also a cable car that you can take to get up to the top. I chose to walk it again. I was trying to acclimate my body to doing things at night. One last warning about this is that while I was there in June, there were still some sections of the staircase that were covered in snow. So I would recommend, if you're not confident walking on snow, to bring some ice picks to really get through those sections. They weren't big, maybe like 15 feet, 5 meters, very small, only like 20 steps total. Another activity I did to really acclimate myself to the nighttime and to the weather was a kayaking tour with Active Tromso. I am name dropping them, not because like they paid me or anything like that. I just loved my tour. The guide was absolutely awesome and it was a really small group. You get picked up in Tromso and you get taken an hour away where you go to this gorgeous fjord that has the clearest water, tons of jellyfish, waterfalls, and it is just like this magical. I was sitting there thinking, oh, I understand how fairy tales started. Because if you told me this was my norm, I'd be like, oh, there must be magic in the world. And it was absolutely stunning. About halfway through the kayaking, they do stop us and pull us onto this little grassy beach where you get to take a little cup of tea or coffee if you like gross things and have some biscuits. And while we were on that little grassy edge, got to watch a dolphin go past, which I didn't even know there were dolphins that far north, but it was really cool. And then even driving home, you think you're done. Oh, you're driving home. No, we saw a bunch of reindeer on the drive home. So they really covered all the bases. I think I got incredibly lucky, but highly recommend taking a kayaking tour with Active Tromso. My last non-running night was spent on the Best Arctic bus tour. So this is kind of a hop-on, hop-off bus that takes you through different fishing villages on the island of Senja. It was actually organized together with the Midnight Sun race organizers. I signed up hoping that as a solo traveler, I'd be able to connect with some other solo travelers and maybe meet some other people who are also running the half marathon. Unfortunately, it didn't really work like that. I got on the bus. There were three other women on the bus who were all solo travelers, but they were going to different stops and they weren't with the half marathon. That made me clear, though, these were some of the most interesting conversations I've ever had, and I hope that someday when I'm 80, I have half as many interesting stories as these women. When I did get off the bus, though, I was alone in a tiny fishing village of 150 people. I went up, checked into a little hotel that was prearranged with Best Arctic, and then I was just kind of free for the next 24 hours. There was no strict plan, there was nothing set up for me. So I went out and I did some hiking. The fjord that I was in was really rainy and cold, which made me really thankful that I did have raincoats and rain pants, which I put on and then went out and just spent the next few hours hiking. I went back to the hotel, had dinner there. It was really good actually. And then I went back out and I wandered around until midnight because that was my goal for all of these nights. Stay awake until midnight so that way when the half marathon comes around, I'm not going to be super sluggish running at, midnight, 1 a.m. While we're talking about weather, the thing about northern Norway is that each fjord almost has its own weather system happening. Because of the tall mountains that separate them, they're capturing all the low-lying clouds. So the fjord I was in was consistently gray and rainy, but the next day when we got on the bus and we drove maybe 20 minutes over to the next fjord, beautiful blue skies. So bring a lot of rain gear, bring a lot of layers and options for how to mix and match your clothing. You will probably need all of it. One other thing I will note about traveling, I stayed in 3 hotels while I was there, and I really needed to have an eye mask for all of them, despite the fact they're in a place that has 24 hours of sunlight. The curtain situation was bad. So bring an eye mask and bring lots of layers and bring rain gear. Now that you're in northern Norway, what are you eating? So the diet here is very heavy on fish. There's a ton of fish, huge Salem farms, and all sorts of other fish are going to be available on the menus. There's also a few items that aren't typical outside of Norway, and that's going to be whale and reindeer. Now, I could not bring myself to eat whale. Um, I like to try new foods, but that was just too far for me. But I did try the reindeer, and let me tell you, Rudolph was delicious. I've had horse in Italy, and that was very tough and gamey, which I thought the reindeer would be in that same family. But to be completely honest, it was more of like a nice steak tenderloin texture with a really nice taste. I loved the reindeer. I think it might be my favorite meat. Norway also has so many amazing baked goods. My favorite is the Skolbrad. This is kind of like a pastry that's then hollowed out a little bit in the center and it's filled with custard, and the edges are covered in a little bit of frosting and some coconut. And it is so good. But honestly, you can't go wrong if you just walk into a bakery and just say, that. Point at anything, you'll be happy. Let's talk about race day. Since the race doesn't start until 10 p.m., you're going to want to spend the day relaxing and resting your legs. So here are some of my favorite things to do just to pass the hours. Well, I recommend doing something active every night. During the day, you can be a little more chill with what you're doing. Here's some of my favorite recommendations for things to do in Tromso. I really like the Polar Museum. This was such an interesting museum. I always say Norway has some of the best museums out of any country I've ever been to. They're just so detailed and factual, and they have great English translations. So I highly recommend you check out the Polar Museum while you're in Tromso. I also recommend you check out Prestvannet. This is a little lake that's kind of at the top of the island of Tromso, and it is absolutely gorgeous. It's like a bird sanctuary, I think, maybe an unofficial bird sanctuary, but there were tons of gorgeous types of birds that you could see there. And I really recommend taking some time checking it out. Of course, you can also spend your time walking around downtown Tromso. There's so much to see, such as the Arctic Chapel, which, well, I didn't go in, I've heard is beautiful. Another option for how to spend your day in Tromso is going to be doing a sauna, followed by a jump into the fjord. I'm not brave enough to do that one, but it is supposed to be really good for your muscles. Let's talk about what to expect once you actually start running the race. I only ran the half marathon, so I don't know much about the marathon, but what I do know is that you're going to cross the major bridge and go past the Arctic Chapel. And this bridge, I walked over it It's a really big hill, okay? And you're gonna cross it once going up and once going back. Prepared for that in your training that you're gonna have a bridge right at the first 3K and then again at the 22-kilometer mark. As for the half marathon, I thought it was a really nice course. You head out from the Tromso city center and you go all the way to the airport before turning around and coming back. There's no major hills along the course, but there are a lot of very small, I'm gonna call them rolling hills. Like you're not going further than like 10 to 20 feet up a hill. But then you're gonna do that like 7, 8, 9 times in a row. So it does slightly get to you. But if you, use the downhills properly, you can use that momentum to get pretty far up the next hill. The views along this course are also absolutely gorgeous. The fjord and the water and the green fields are just iconic. There's no other word for them. I cried a little bit during this race because I was just so swept away with, oh my gosh, how am I running this race? It's so pretty. Also, something about the fjord, even though it's an out and back, the views are so pretty that you don't notice that you're on the same course. Like, I was seeing things completely different going back in the other direction, which usually doesn't really happen. Usually you're like, oh yeah, there's the same mountain. Okay, I'm almost done. I passed this shed already. I wasn't even noticing the same things on the way back because there was just so much beauty to absorb. After the race, the organizers have put together a few extra things for runners. I chose not to participate because honestly, I was wiped. But there was a little party at a cafe that you could check out, and I think they'll be doing it again this year. And you can also do a sauna trip. I did actually look at doing the sauna, but by the time I finished my race and then went over to the line to see what was happening, there were no reservations, and it was going to be another hour before there was an opening in the sauna. And I was like, I would rather go to sleep. Overall, I highly recommend this race and spending some time to really travel around Tromso and the Senja region and just explore northern Norway because it is a once in a lifetime opportunity to get to see that 24 hours of sunlight. So I hope you have a great time running this race. If you like this video, hit subscribe because I talk about everything international races.